Hi, everyone. This is Rohit from Riceful Mastery, and today I'm excited to have Monik Pamecha, who's one of the co-founders of Toma, which is helping calls with AI. Monik is a grad of University of Berkeley, and Toma is from the YC Winter 24 batch. Welcome to the show, Monik.
Hey, Rohit. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So we had a fun chat before this, but super interesting. Because you lived in India and then you moved to New York, San Francisco. You worked couple of years there. So before we talk about Toma, what got you interested in this crazy world of startups, and what was the journey all about from India to the US?
Yeah, I mean, so long back, this is probably like, I think I was like 13 years old or something when, I had learned to write code and I was just building websites at the time and doing, just kind of exploring the web and stuff. And obviously, I used to run, everybody knew about Steve Jobs and technology and all that stuff. And I used to run a tech blog. And we actually had like 14 writers on the blog through a
Oh,
revenue sharing program, and I grew that to like it used to get like millions of impressions. One of the things I used to do is cover WWDC, which is Apple's developer event, which actually happened, I think, very recently as well. So it
true.
was like
Yeah.
2008 since when he introduced iPhone. I was just mesmerized by everything that Apple used to make, and I was writing about it all the time, and I was just in it. And at some point when I was writing it, I was like, huh, wouldn't it be cool to be making these things as opposed to just writing about them? And I mean, we were making money off, Google had AdSense and monetize your websites. Again, a very different world back
Yeah.
then. Apps are so different today. But all of that kind of got me started with like, I knew how to code. I was like, huh, let me try to make a few things. And I just started building stuff at that time. And I think the other thing that was clear to me was like, why is it that all the great things that come out in the world are happening in Silicon Valley? I was like, that was the only thing on my mind. I was like, any company I use, any product I use, like, why is it just over there? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
So that those two things were just set in my mind that I want to build something, and I think the place I want to start is going to be there. And
Mm,
fast forward many years, it is happening, and now I kind of look back and it makes sense to me why,
mm,
this is true. But you have to experience it once, and then you can tell the freaking difference. Like wow, like.
yeah. Yeah. Interesting. And you mentioned that. I mean, you're a Bombay guy, but you moved to New York. I think Bombay, New York, are pretty similar. What's the difference in the New York tech scene versus, say, San Francisco tech scene?
Well, again, I think YC has very strong opinions on this, and I think the thing that they say at the end of the batch, is like they show you this on the screen. They'll show you this thing where it's like, oh, there's one thing if I was to tell you would double your odds of being a unicorn, would you do it? And then they're like, a lot of people we tell them, but they're not going to do it. Whatever, blah blah blah. At the end, it's like stay in SF. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
and
Right.
they're very sold on that. And then I think they convince the founders also to believe that. Now, having spent like 5 years, I lived in Manhattan,
Right.
so right in the middle of it. And the thing that I feel is that it is distracting to be in New York. It's an amazing city. I think, as I was telling you, if you're in your mid-20s, it's an amazing way to spend your life. That
Right.
is as good as it gets. Like, period, hands down. I lived that, and I'm not gonna lie, that is the best. I think that is the problem.
Mm,
That I mean, if you're building something that is like groundbreaking and you really want to go all in, you have to sacrifice. And I think, I mean, I'm not saying it's not possible. The last company I worked at, Braze, our co-founders, they were they built a company in New York. I mean, it's they went public. They're doing really great, and
right.
it's funny because their founder Bill. He told me one thing, which I found really funny. This is like the impression that people in New York have also of that. So he's like, don't drink the Kool-Aid. When you go there, just don't. And I mean, I agree with him in some sense, but I do think that, yeah, the difference is like there's just so much to do here when you come to SF. There's so much nature. I think the community, I was telling my wife about this as well, which is like the first question at any New York party was like, where do you live?
Yeah.
Now in SF, the first question is like, what are you working on? What are you making? Like,
Yeah.
and it is not even once, it happens all the time. And that kind of tells you that, where people are, and then it's the energy that's around. And I mean, I'm just an observer in both places, and I see that, that difference. So I think it's easier to do bold, risky things here.
Right.
New
Right.
York, it might be, you just are increasing your challenges, and not saying that you cannot do it. There are people, outliers everywhere, but man, it's hard.
Yeah. Right. Right. Interesting. And w- how you mentioned about Y Combinator. I've had a couple of founders who come on the pod, but how has Y Combinator change your mindset, and what's the whole program about for listeners who don't know about Y Combinator and they're listening to this podcast for the first time? What was the entire process about?
Yeah. So I mean, YC is probably one of the best programs if you want to do a startup, and
Right.
a lot of reasons for that. I'll just go over the main ones, and also like I'll tell you about the process. The process is actually very simple. You fill in an application, and there's a 10-minute interview, and that's it. They just make a decision, and they let you know like the night off that you're in or
Oh,
not. Because I think the philosophy is that, I mean, the sign, it's like pretty clear. Like you don't need a lot of time to figure out. And also they invest in like companies that are pretty early on. So it's really the founders that you're betting on.
right.
That's their philosophy. And so that was the process. Once you get in, it's it's like, I don't know if do you know what Vipassana is?
Yeah, I
But
do.
so I've done that meditation. It's like a 10-day retreat, right?
Right.
Not, I wouldn't even call it a retreat, but it's like, just focus meditation. You don't speak to anybody, no eye contact, nothing. Just meditate 12 hours a day for 10 days straight, and then you go back to the world,
Mm,
from some remote location. What I felt was like YC is a bit like Vipassana, but for startups. It's like you get to that place and they obviously want to bring everybody into SF. And right now, I mean, I'm living in Dog Patch, which is where YC also happens. And I loved it so much that I'm still staying here. But it's so focused. They bring people in and bring a lot of smart people in together who are very ambitious. So check, ability, check ambition. The next thing is they give a deadline, like here the batch ends, and you gotta prove up yourself to the world and to the investors or whatever, right? Your goal is, but
right.
get it done by then. And that's it. Now you work your way back from everything, and it accelerates. Like I think without YC, if we had to do the same things we did and get to the same place, it would have taken us at least 4 or 5 times more time than it took us now. It
Mm,
just accelerated everything. You got through the crap and you're like, all right, this is what matters. So I think that's what all of YC is. The essence of it is just that they'll bring speakers, who've done it before. You have partners, like our partner was Tom Blomfield, who's Monzo's founder. So
yeah.
it's just great getting like, every few weeks we speak to him. Even now, you can always reach out to him for advice. And he's like so well versed with our whole story, so it's great to get that experience. And it's just all of these 20 things plugged into one place, and there's all the mistakes that you can make, you will make, of course. You just make them sooner. And then when
Right.
you make it, you recover more quickly. I think that's what it accelerates the whole thing. And it's, I mean, personally, I think it's not so great because I mean, building a startup personally is just a terrible idea, I think, for your life.
Right.
Like there is just no peace at all.
Right.
But
Right.
it's that kind of sweet pain. So YC just, I would say that's how I felt. I mean, my co-founder too, which is like we were burnt out at some points, and like just feeling different things. But the company was going well, but ourselves, we were like, going from one misery to like a high to a low. It's just insane, and it's just the beginning. I don't even know like what more we're gonna see in the future.
Right. Right. And when you came to Y Combinator, you came up with a different idea,
Yeah.
right? And how did you pivot? And does YC allow you to pivot even when you brought in with a specific idea?
Yeah. So two things. Like, one is we were working on something in healthcare, which
Right.
was, initially as founders, I think most founders, the easiest thing is, all right, let's solve our own problems. And we start doing
Yeah.
that. And then you spend some time, and then kind of what you realize is that maybe you're not the best person to do it, or that problem isn't big enough, or you're just not, that fit doesn't exist, whatever, right? A lot of things we found out. I mean, and it's evident because when you push something, it doesn't work. Like maybe it's not so evident. Actually, in hindsight, you do. I don't know. It's tough,
Mm,
but you spend some months, and we got into YC, and then we things got real quickly because now we're like, all right, we have a deadline, and do we see this being this at this place in a few months? And we're like, maybe not, right?
Yeah.
And then we decided to pivot. Now with YC, uh, they promote pivoting. I think their real bet is on the founders. It's not about, like, hey, what like you have this great idea, like just go on to this, whatever. They trust you with whatever it is. And if you have data that it's not working out, change. But that's what it
Okay.
is, right? You gotta keep moving, keep changing, because the best companies, I think they have all pivoted from something else to something else entirely.
Right.
Like a
Right.
recruiting company that came out of something for, plumbers, and then they're like, oh, you know what, this is the real issue, not that. And then they keep going. I think, yeah, as long as you're experimenting with, real people, talking to people, trying to make something that works, you eventually land on something that does work if you keep going.
Right, right, right. Interesting. And when we had a first conversation, I was quite intrigued about a very specific niche that you got into, which is auto dealerships. And you mentioned you didn't come from this background, but what was the entire story about? Coming onto this niche, and why did you want to solve it?
Yeah. I mean, so I think when we got into YC, we initially started working on, voice AI was something that my co-founder worked at Scale AI,
Yeah,
which is another YC company as well back in the past, but now they're pretty big. So
right.
he worked on like actual like the stuff to build that OpenAI used for training their LLMs, the software that they use for all of their training stuff. We had a lot of experience in this space. I worked at Braze, which did customer communication. So it's a lot of like multi-channel communication. Um, so we had some idea and we saw that problem. We were like, we were just toying around with that. And then we just built something and then we put it out on Facebook groups and Reddit and some places. And it's like we spent 6 months trying to make something that nobody cared about. And then we
Mm,
put this out, and within a week, we had like 200 demos lined up. And it's just that the magnitude, we're like, oh my God, like this is what even an inkling of something that works feels like. And then we're like, all right, let's walk into this, let's explore this. Something similar to what I was telling you before is that my co-founder and Anthony, we all think like this way, that we're like experimental physicists in the sense
right.
that there are theoretical physicists who have a different approach to science. And then our approach is we play with, whatever nature is, conduct our experiments, kind of like figure out what we need to do and move in that direction, you know. So we started working with a bunch of companies at the beginning. And then we quickly realized that, you really need depth with AI
Yeah.
applications. Like that's the difference between a demo and something that works really, really well to the point where the customer is like, all right, I don't want to talk to a human again. Like,
Mhm.
how do you make that experience, right? Right now, people listen to a bot and they're like, oh my God, not again, right?
Mhm.
We envision a future where you're going to be like, oh no, a human, I want to talk to a bot.
Okay.
uh,
Okay.
how do you get there? It's all the details and nuances. So we work with a bunch of customers, who are not in the automotive industry. They were in healthcare, in banking, and they had far more regulations than, our procurement phase with the bank was longer than the time it took for us to even complete onboarding and do like a month of actual product in the automotive business.
Mm,
So there are a lot of like things about like different industries, and we as we work with them, we found out that like of course there are some problems that need to be solved, but like are they feasible? Like does the technology allow that? And do you have that margin of error? Like
mm,
you mess up something on a healthcare, like I mean the probability of that blowing up is so much more than you messing up something else in a different industry. So
mm,
you learn all that as you work through it. And then the other thing is it just naturally grew. I think that's the thing. Like the thing with things that work is that if you're doing something right, like you don't feel you don't have to push, you feel the pull.
mm.
And that's kind of what happened with the automotive business. We had one customer, who brought in a dealership again in one of the locations in the US, and it worked really well. And then they just stole other dealers, and then they brought more dealers. And then within a few months, we were, doing more calls with them than all of our other, customers combined. And then
Right.
we decided that, all right, looks like it has legs. And that's what I was saying. Like, it's more like an arranged marriage.
Right.
uh, we kind of got married first, that we started working with them, and then we're like, huh, looks like a really big problem. We're in love, and then we keep going.
Mm,
And then we doubled down on that, like, and kept going, and then it's just a natural flow because we realized, hey, look, there are 290 million cars in the US.
yeah.
Right? They are all being bought by somebody somewhere. They're getting serviced somewhere because you need to, make sure your car is running fine. So the population is 350, 330 million. 90% of the people have a car. Like 40% of the cars are greater than 6 years old. So they need so much more service. And the car is expensive. Service is like the whole, like the numbers are staggering.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All in all, we kind of reverse, like retrofitted everything. And we're like, I see, this is why they wanted it so bad.
Mm,
Uh,
mm. Got it. Got it. Super interesting. And um, especially, you talked about regulations in other industries. When it comes to a car, dealership, you made an interesting point earlier. Like, you need to, like car manufacturers need to sell through a dealer. But do they have regulations on how do you sell a product? And obviously, a training would have been done. But when it comes to those sort of regulations, did you have to face those sort of regulations, or what was the entire process for you like?
yeah, so this is mainly for dealerships, right? In the US at least, is that auto manufacturers cannot directly sell to consumers in a lot of states. Like their regulations that just prohibit that direct selling.
Mm,
And this has like historical roots, like back maybe early like maybe 100 years ago or 80 years ago. I think sometime around that these
right.
regulations took place. And this was to prevent like manufacturers from like controlling, like, I think the times are different and the problems are different. But these regulations have continued to carry on, and they built this massive industry of dealerships, which are not owned by, they're franchised or they're independent. So they could be selling only one brand of a car, or they could be selling more depending on, whatever, they're new franchise cars or old. Um, but so so these dealerships are actually responsible for that entire journey, that a consumer goes through when buying a car, because it's a pretty expensive thing. It's the same reason why you have realtors, right? Well,
Yeah.
you could just walk in and buy the house today, right? Like, but why do you need somebody to actually help you through that entire process? So that's what the dealerships do actually for a very sophisticated, and an expensive purchase, right? And that too, it doesn't just end at that because now you got to maintain it, right? So you need
Mm,
help all of the upkeep of the car and all that stuff. So the dealers actually enable that because they're closest to the customer, and it's very regional, right? There are dealerships everywhere in the US,
mm,
70,000 of them, covering like every spot, rural, urban, whatever it is, right? And then they actually build the relationships with the customer.
right.
And that's how you get like, because there are so many different brands. Like, why would you pick one brand over the other? Like, they're all fighting for market share,
True.
right?
True.
It is through these dealers that they actually execute, and give the customer the experience that they want. Because it is a massive scale operation. Like no car company can just go ahead and say, I'm going to service every, because that's where things start breaking down. You
Mm,
need people, you need the process. So that's where dealers come in, and they're some states are protected by regulations, some they're not. There are, different options of buying cars now. You have Carvana, a lot of competitors as well who, sell online. For example, there's no physical presence
mm,
where you buying used cars. So there are different experiences that people pick, but I think the number one continues to be like, dealerships, like they're selling cars, and also like service. So for service too, right? You can get service from dealerships, you can get service from independent auto body shops. So it's just such a huge market. Like you think of education, like automotive is as big as that because
mm.
every driving a car, and then you need to get to places, right? The inherent need for me to be somewhere
Right.
is
Right. Right. Got it.
exists.
Got it. No, I think uh, the US market is quite different from the part of the world that I came from, but I think it's pretty similar to how it happens there in the UK. But when you looked at onboarding, the first 10 to 100 dealers, did you focus on a specific region, or a car brand? What was the entire process for you to onboard the first few
Yeah.
customers?
Yeah, we did not focus on, we actually had dealers from all across the country. So there were
No.
like actually like 6 states. Then they're all East Coast, West Coast, and in the middle of the country. Um, that was one. The second thing is not even brand. We had all different brands. All the seven of them were like different brands. I think the common thing was that the the problems that they have, which is they were just dropping calls. They were losing business. Like that is a thing that we found with early users. And really, that's how you really hunt for early users because the only thing they share in common is a problem.
Right.
And it's burning them. It's like they cannot ignore it. And I think that's the thing that we found with our early adopters as well. That instead of us finding them, they found us, or our the people who we worked with kind of knew. Also, the automotive business in the US is like very collaborative in the sense that dealers are part of these groups, which are 20 Gs, where they're not competing with those other dealers, but they talk to them, they meet like once or twice a year and discuss ways of improving their business. So
Interesting.
there's a lot of conferences that happen in the US for the automotive business where dealers, know each other, talk to each other. So it's also one of the most closed off industries, I would say. Like if you're not part of the car business, it's very difficult and very different from
Right.
we initially built for bread and butter SaaS companies, right? Who are buying like marketing automation tools or AI like labeling tools or whatever, right? Like it's so different from car dealerships. And it's actually I've had the most fun in my life working with our customers because they are upfront, they know the numbers inside out, and I mean, it's hard to sell technology to them, but it's also easy because
Mm.
they're so plugged into the bottom line, they know if something works or not. Like, they can sniff bullshit away out from like miles apart. And also, I mean, come on, they're the best people at selling. Like
Yeah. True.
they're absolute best. They own these places because they're really good at what they do, and now we are like selling to them. So
Mm.
it's just very different, but it's amazing. There's just no space for BS. It's just brass tacks. Like what is it? And it's truly amazing.
And Monik, you talked about how your demos could be so good that people would want to use a bot. So how do you make sure that you provide that natural sounding voice interactions for the dealers? How much time did it take for you to build that sort of product?
Yeah, I mean the thing is, it was in the making in the sense that all the work that we've done and on our work lives before, we've all dealt with, optimization problems. Like I did distributed systems, my co-founder did machine learning. I have a lot of academic research experience in like natural language processing.
Interesting.
So all the way back in 2016, I built an AI chatbot using generative models, which are really big now. But I wrote that paper in 2016, and then we actually deployed it for one of the large companies in India. And it's called Haptic.
Yeah.
Uh, that was doing like just and in India also the other challenges. There are 26 different 30 languages that are people are speaking at the same time in different states. Even within that small subset, you have people switching from one language to other and all that stuff. So I have a lot of experience dealing with those problems and the data. And it was like I was building these things back then, and I was like, oh, I wish if somebody solved this, and this, then everything would be amazing. And then fast forward to a couple of years, we're like, oh, I see these things have come together now. And then we basically got all of that in. It took us a couple of months to get like, something that was really solid. And then we just pushed out as soon as possible to our users. And then we got a feedback from them and we kept iterating on that. So it was really a lot of optimization, a lot of experience of us just having done it in past lives and then bringing all that together. And it was just like, oh my God, like interstellar moment, like everything came together. And I'm like, oh, I see piece A, B, C. And then you put it together, it works. Great.
Got it. And how did you go about integrating with their existing business software and systems? Was it quite a bit of a challenge for you?
Oh, a massive challenge. And I think that's what most founders in AI are going to find out now is
Okay.
that the actual building the technology is all right. Like, at some point it even gets commoditized.
Right.
The real tough part is plumbing it into the business processes that these businesses have right now. And all
Mm.
the software, they use 20 different things. Some of them even may not even have an API. Like,
Hmm.
how are you going to get that information from there, right? Then you start looking for different ways of accessing that information and, whether they're manual processes or can you automate them? I mean, we spent a lot of time trying to build a lot of integrations with like most popular providers, for example, for dealerships. And it continues to be a challenge. And I think this is just not us. I think this is going to be the theme.
Mm,
uh, it's kind of like why bicycles existed for hundreds of years, but they weren't as popular because all the parts, the wheels, the handle, like the gears, everything existed, right? Well, because society, culture, constraints on random things, right? Like that have nothing to do with the core technology.
mm,
And it is the theme that we see here as well. Same thing, like you want to, again, regulations complicated further depending on what data you can access, what you can store, what you can retain, what can you process, what can you send to an external party to actually process on behalf of you. Like
right.
everything is is a challenge when integrating. And yeah.
And what are the metrics that they judge you on? How many calls have you taken? How many calls have dropped? And do you keep like a dashboard and share it across with them?
Oh yeah, I mean, I keep we have alerts on everything. Like we're
Okay.
so obsessed with making sure the quality is high. We
Right.
get like updates nonstop with a summary of like why a single call went bad. Like we do thousands of calls every day,
Well.
and we read through all of them all the time. So we have quality analysis. Like we rank them, we rate them. We have different tags, categories, different alerts set up on everything. We expose these same exact numbers to our customers as well because we just want to hold ourselves accountable to it. So anytime it dips below a certain number, like we have a quality out of 5 and it's like below 3, then all right, we got to look into it, flag
Mm,
those things automatically. You can use AI to assess AI. You can use human feedback as well, like how pissed are people, right? When they're
yeah.
talking to annoyed, did they use curse words? All these different things that you can put. You build all of that into the technology to make sure that every single call is amazing.
Mm,
And it's tough because the scope is so wide, right?
right.
But we monitor all these and they extend that. And of course there are business metrics that matter to the customers. For example, appointments that you booked, services that you've sold, diff basically different things that happen. Just did how happy were they at the end of the call. Like
Mm,
you don't need to have surveys anymore, right? Because a lot of times now with the technology you have, while I'm talking to you, I already know, like, or to some extent, right? Like, how the experience was.
right. Got it. And since we are from India, and India was like this outsourcing hub, but do you think with this AI agents, we'll see the end of the BPO or the outsourcing industry in India and Philippines?
um I think a lot is going to change and it is happening.
Mm,
uh I think the nature of the jobs will change for sure,
okay.
because if you think about it, like maybe 10, 15 years ago, people used to call centers and the question was like, hey, can I reset my password, right?
Yeah.
Today, they still call them, but the things that they ask are different. They're more sophisticated, like depending on how technologies and needs have changed. So I do think that a big percentage of it is going to get like, either they will be made redundant or they'll move the focus elsewhere. And then another chunk of it will just become more sophisticated, more challenging, more complicated. Because now what happens is the easy things are taken care of. So now, I mean, people keep consuming. It's never going to end, right? Like if they stop, economy stops, right?
Yeah.
And the needs keep going, the technology keeps growing. So now the stuff to be dealt with also continues to grow.
Mm,
Technology can make it easy, but there's always going to be something at the edge, which is like always pushing the boundary ahead. And then they're
right.
like, oh, this cannot be solved by AI. Let me have humans. So I think I would say like 20 to 30% of the jobs will be made redundant in the sense that, those tasks will be just purely automated.
Right.
Then the 70% will either have some form of repurposing or, movement into like different things, different roles. Even
Right.
for example, like data annotation is like a completely different industry now that these models are data hungry. Who's
Right.
gonna do that, right? Like you need people to give that data. So they're
Mm,
repurposing that from like answering calls to, hey, let's say the how the calls went. Can you assess that? Can you point out the places where it went wrong? And now can you suggest the fixes for that,
mm,
right?
right.
Morphing into like different roles, it could still be listening to calls, but now the work they do is different, right? It's still using their understanding. But I do see at least the industries that do not like adapt to this
Yeah.
will be on the short end. Like they'll get the short end.
Right. And what measures are you taking are in place to protect, customer data privacy and security? Obviously, you're there in the US, but here in Europe, you have GDPR rules and things are there are a lot of regulations when it comes to data. But well, what are you doing to protect that privacy?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so we were HIPAA. As I mentioned, we were working with some healthcare outfits as well before. We're HIPAA certified. Like HIPAA is also one of the most complicated regulations, for data privacy and like, making sure any PII is not exposed. So I mean, we've all worked in tech companies, like my co-founder and I, all our lives, and we built stuff for Europe, for New Zealand, for Australia, for like different countries. So we're very familiar with the technology, and to a large extent, you rely on providers that obviously have a lot of these inbuilt as well.
Right.
Encryption, isolation, like all data isolation, all the redaction of PII.
Right.
Those are like table stakes, like we got to like we did all those things day one because again, we've been living, breathing through that in the past.
Correct. And how do you address any potential concerns when it comes to AI bias, when it comes to voice interactions?
Yeah. I mean, that is, an interesting question. Like, yeah, bias is such a big challenge, like just
Yeah.
normally, right? Because even like things like, I'll give you like very simple examples, right? Like, if you have data model, like models trained on names, right? Let's say I want to take your information. It's
Right.
only trained on like names from a certain part of the world. It's not going to get the other names, right? It's going to struggle terribly. It's going to be like, was your name John? You're like, no, it's something else, right? Like in maybe in Hindi or some other language, right? And then
Right.
they're gonna struggle constantly. That's a form of bias, right? Because it already has this information and it just over optimizes for seeing more of that type.
Mm.
Uh, the challenge with these problems is that yes, they exist. Of course, like dealing with technology is one way, like add more data, change it. But it's a machine, right? Like it can mess up in the most creative ways.
Right.
So the way to deal with it is, I mean, it's a design problem as well. Like, how do you design the experience that you don't run into certain, roadblocks like that? Like, I mean, of course, it might be difficult, easy. Like, you could have them spell the name, for example, right? That's obviously more painful for the customer, or you have it like reconfirm the name. Like, you've got to build all these flows and design experiences that, work around these limitations while the technology also comes up and it's able to in future there's probably going to be more things where it'll detect from your accent or from what you're saying already like what you're going to expect, and it gets smarter and avoids those issues. So tech and design like both go hand in hand, and whatever tech you cannot solve with what you have today, you use design to deal with it. And
Mm.
obviously tech, you keep investing in tech to improve the data, to
Mm.
change models, add more parameters, whatever that is.
Right.
And
Right.
together, I think we'll be marching towards something where i- in future you kind of want bias. You will want bias, but bias to yourself, right? Like
Mm.
you already wanted to know the kind of names that you have, for example, already, right? I mean, the bias has a role to play. It's not that, it's not like it just needs to be repurposed to the right thing.
Right. Right.
That really is what personalization is. It's like bias in
Right.
recommendation, bias in assistance to your own taste,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
So it's just finding how to, you point the cannon in the right direction.
Mm. Mm. Interesting. And you've been part of building products and been running Toma for quite some time. But how should pre-product market fit companies founders set the North Star metric? What should be the number one metric in your view that they should look at when they're building?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it depends. I think the most boring answer, right? Depends on the business, depends on everything. But one thing that YC says, which, as more time goes by, I realize like it truly distills the essence of what product market fit is, and all of that stuff is. It's like you make something that people want,
Mm.
and any metric that you have must be a proxy of how badly somebody wants your product.
Mm.
And that is a measure of, do you have a fit, which is like there's a world where your product exists. Like, for example, in our cases, the dealerships we work with, I mean, the question sometimes we ask them is like, okay, what if we took this out, next week? Like, would you be just okay? Would it be fine? And they're like, no, 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 do not think about it, because they're getting like, 1,200 calls a week, and they have their staff, on the floor. They don't want to take the calls because they're busy. And they're
Right,
like, oh, that'll be a lot of pain. So I think it's all a proxy of how badly you want it, how badly your customers want it.
right,
And any metric that is, aligned with that want, I
right.
think that is the best metric to have. And at early stage companies, your product is changing, things are happening. Like for us as well, as we, navigate the terrain. It's like, metrics change. But I
Right,
think what
right.
doesn't change is that guiding principle that, yes, I want, like, I'm hungry. I want to have dinner, and I like this food item. Like, it's so clear, with certain things. I feel like the goal is to not overcomplicate these things. Just keep it
Mm,
simple, right? Like, do they want it that bad?
mm.
And it usually translates to paying for it, which is
Yeah,
why revenue is another great indicator. Because, hey, I mean, I want it, but I don't want to pay for it. Like,
true.
do you
Yeah.
really want it?
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely. I think revenue is a great indicator, and especially AI is a very interesting model because uh the, you have incumbents, enterprises who have distribution as an advantage, and you've seen companies like Microsoft and Amazon where they uh, because of the moat as a distribution, they can create products. But do you think in this AI war, do you think startups or incumbents, who do you think is going to win this war?
Well, whoever can move quickly,
Mm,
really. I mean, there are some big companies that are able to move quickly, very rarely.
mm,
And most of the startups, that is the edge. That's it.
right,
Because I think it's like an open terrain, it's like a lot of undiscovered stuff. Like we find out new things all the time, and we're like, wow, like this is possible, or we can do this, and you can only find that when you're moving very quickly. You rapidly iterate, and like you have experiments, and you're like, oh, okay, let me
right.
try this, whatever. So I think startups definitely have a massive edge here. Like if there was a time where you could do something and you had the highest probability of winning, like this is that time.
Mm,
Everybody is just reeling from the shock of like the technology, and they're like, I don't know, but I want to use it, but I don't know exactly how, right?
right, right,
And startups have that benefit that they today you can shut shop and open the shutter tomorrow, and you're something completely different.
right, right.
So that edge, speed, that's it. I think that's right now, that's what matters the most.
Yeah. So you're saying it's still with the startups, and Sam Altman recently said that in the next 5 years we'll have $1 billion companies with 10 or 20 employees. How true do you think is Sam when it comes to executing and having those a $1 billion ARR company with just 10 or 20 employees?
I'll tell you something. I 100% believe that, because, my co-founder and I, there's just two of us,
Right.
and we've been able to scale. Like, I mean, we have some, consultants that we hire, but, we've been able to scale the entire company, like just the two of us.
Mm,
Uh, and I don't think this would have been possible 5 years ago. Like we have automations and tools built in for everything, like sales, CRM, you're doing support, you're doing, bugs fixing, alerting, everything, scheduling, all of that. I have tools and, AI that I'm using to actually achieve that. I would have had to hire at least two people to do what we're doing today,
mm,
more. So the I don't disagree with that. I think we might see it sooner.
is it right? Interesting. And how do you get to decide? How do you where to focus your attention and resources, considering that you're trying to disrupt a huge market, but you're also a pretty small and lean team.
Well, I mean, as you do more of startups, like I think you realize the your superpower is not saying yes, it's saying no.
Right.
Like that's it. Like there's only limited amount of time that we have, and there are only so many things we can do. And I think it's really cutting the crap out, which is like, all right, this is not gonna work. This doesn't seem like it will give us a return. So it's like you just train your mind. with like past experiences and data and completely base everything on that, like measure everything that you can, right? Even if you have experiments, like everything, you need numbers, right? Like there's no like I was telling my co-founder, like I want to ban the word I feel, or I think. Like
Right,
there's just no place for these words. What we want is I see this, this is what it is. Like is a good word because it asserts like the reality of whatever you're seeing. And you just use that to make decisions, I think. And over time you just get better and better at that. And hopefully, yeah, of course you make mistakes. It's just how do you even have the data to correct it? Like I made a mistake, but like am I just gonna have that as a memory, or is that gonna go back into my process and next time I wouldn't make it? Why? How?
right. Got it. And where do you see it all? Sales, marketing, operations? What's the way ahead for you?
I mean, for us, one of the major things that we're working on is like, sales and engineering. Those are the two things, as I mentioned, right? I think automating things is
Right,
one of the things that we excel at and we want to do good at. And I think engineering unlocks that because you
right.
could throw 5 ops. That's what kind of like what Sam Altman was saying is that are you going to hire a team of like 20 ops people, or are you going to get like 3 engineers who, automate some processes, and then you have 1 or 2 ops people who guide that, and then the whole thing works, you know,
Hmm.
amplifiers of effort. So engineering and like sales are the two places that we want to expand upon.
Got it, got it. And I quickly want to do the top three. What's your favorite business book?
Well, I think this is a cliched one, but I do love Zero to One. I think
Yeah.
I read fiction too. I like a lot of other books, but that probably distills the essence of everything like that there is in a startup. It's like when I read that, every time I do something in life and I read that, I'm like, oh my God, like this is what, Thiel was saying.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll put that in the show notes. And if you could go back in time when you started building Toma, what is one thing you would have focused on or done anything differently?
Yeah, I think I would. I mean, we've always considered building a company as a kind of a quest for truth. It's like, what do you think the world is and what it really is? The delta is what makes you take wrong decisions. So it's like reducing that delta. And a lot of times is that you often kind of know the truth, but you are unwilling to accept it. So I think just changing that up and having more courage to just be upfront, like if something's not working, accept. Like let's just be bold and face everything as is immediately instead of delaying it. And there's also it's like a thing of like emotions and being objective and that balance, right? Like I would just tune down the emotions as much as possible when decision making. And then of course you're human, you will deal with all these emotions, but decision making and emotions just do not go well. And I would, if I had a knob, I would like turn it down a lot.
Interesting. And what's your favorite online tool? For example, Gmail, Slack, Zoom.
Well, so a couple of things. I think Jira, yeah, again, very boring, but it's pretty amazing. It just works well if you know how to use it well. And
Right.
to be honest, like I use Sublime. Like it's like this a text editor, a
Okay.
simple text editor, or you could use Notes or whatever. But I think a lot of tools are overhyped. The simplest ones are just writing things down,
Right.
and the note-taking tool, if you're a programmer, you've used that, so it just works well.
Got it. We'll put that in the show notes. And Monik, what is the best way people can reach out to you and know more about Toma?
Yeah, I mean, you can check out toma.com. That's our website. And you can even trial our product. It's live. You can try the live demos as well. And we are also hiring for an engineering position and a sales position. So if this industry excites you and like taking AI to a dinosaur industry and completely changing the guts inside out, this is the opportunity and the place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. This is really exciting, and I'm really happy to see all the growth that I'm seeing for your company. But this is super interesting, and thank you so much for taking your time and speaking to us. I really enjoyed
Yeah,
my conversation with you.
yeah. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation.